Hey, Master Gardeners, I was at the grocery store today and I bought some tulips. And they're in bloom right now in January in the grocery stores in Maryland. How do they do that? This is called forcing bulbs. So all that means is they potted up the bulb, they pre-cooled it, imitating winter weather, and then they pulled it out, started giving it sunlight and lots of moisture and light, natural light, and whammo, they come into bloom. How do they do this? These bulbs have actually got the embryo flower pre-formed inside of them. So all you have to do is provide it the proper conditions, which is imitate winter. So how can you do that? Usually we don't use a container that's very deep, usually something that's somewhat shallow. You've purchased your bulbs. Maybe you didn't get them planted in September, October in time, and you're like, oh, I don't feel like planting, it's already gotten so cold. Well, then you can do this forcing system. You're gonna lay the same cultivar in the pot, and I put them in there shoulder to shoulder, touching one another, and then cover with 1 inch of soil. The soil medium I'm using is a sterilized mix, so I can hopefully ensure that I won't get too much fungus. But one of these dry seed starting mixes or potting mediums that we know is clean. There's actually no natural outdoor soil in this at all. It's all peat moss and vermiculite or perlite. So I lay them in here. I'm going to cover them with 1 inch of soil on top, and then I'm going to water them in good. I don't have my watering can, so I won't do that for you. I'm going to label it, and then I'm going to get my calendar out. It's going to take about 14 weeks will be sufficient cold for this plant, for the bulb, to prepare itself to flower. Without that pre-cooling period, you're not going to get your blossoms. You have to have a cool period, and they really need to be rooted during that. The first 1 to 3 weeks, they're spending the time making roots inside your container. You do not have to fertilize. All you do is keep this evenly moist. Make sure they're not standing in water. And you don't want anything piled on top. You can't do 5 pots and stand them in your refrigerator. You have to be cautious doing it in the refrigerator, which is adequate to do because the temperature is 45 degrees, and you want the temperature to run around 43 to 50 degrees for that rooting period and the pre-cooling period. But anyway, you're going to run this about 12 to 14 weeks. First 3 weeks is rooting. The following 10 weeks is going to be the pre-cooling period. So you need to mark it on your calendar, sort of count the number of weeks from the day you put them in the fridge and then to the end and when you expect it. And then you're going to pull it out at that end of the pre-cooling period. You pull it out, you start giving it natural light. Usually they've shot up about 3 to 4 inches in height, a little bit taller than this little guy, a little shorter than this guy, 3 to 4 inches. They're often kind of yellowish in color at that time. No green because they haven't been in sunlight. They're not only getting a cool period, it's also dark wherever you put them. So it could be in a cool root cellar or something like that. Or if you have a shed that doesn't freeze and drop down too low, you don't want them to go below 32 degrees. And yet that cold period has to be consistent all the time. You don't want it wavering up and down either. But the truth is, if you got a shed, do it in your shed and just deal with whatever the weather brings. But once it gets up to 4 inches, you bring it into bright sunlight, and then it'll naturally just come into flower for you and probably be better quality than this tulip I bought, which has necks that are all bent over. But make sure you mark your calendar so you know when to pull it out to get it into get it into bloom in your house, maybe for Easter. You know, if you don't have a refrigerator or a shed, what else you can do is just man your shovel, dig a trench in your yard, and put this in the ground like 18 inches deep. You want to get it down just below the freeze line. We're having a mild winter here in Maryland, so at this time of the year, if you had a window well outside of your basement, you could drop it down in the window well. It would probably be adequately cold to allow it to make some roots. That's what I'm going to do with this pot. I'm going to take it home and put it in my window well, which is not likely to freeze heavy because it's up against my house, my heated house, so probably not going to freeze. And I'm going to see how well I do trying to force these few tulips. And since it's already late in January, not many things you can do with these. Now, my friend who owns all these, he is going to get them in the ground today. And if we get adequate cold weather and they get roots on them, he's going to have his blooms in spring. So if you have leftover tulips and leftover daffodils and it's January, you might as well get them in the ground if the ground's thawed. You got nothing to lose. It's better than trying to store them dry because they're just going to decay or they're going to break down and begin to wrinkle. So there's some tips on how to force your tulips. Let me make sure you heard this. 12 to 14 weeks is the number, somewhere around 40 degrees, and you can do it in your refrigerator. If you do it in the fridge, wrap it in a Ziploc to keep it away from other ripening fruits, or dig a trench in the ground and bury them out there. Give it a try, especially if you have some leftover tulip bulbs. There you go, Master Gardeners.